When you were going to butcher a sheep, you would not speak about butchering in front of the sheep. So it was best to make the sign language or the hand motion without saying, butcher that one. The language of our people, the Navajo, as I have mentioned before, that it was the language that was given to the Dene by the holy people. But other things than that have occurred since the time when the language was given to the Dene, because at the time in history, which is after 1492 or even before 1492, and that is when Christopher Columbus bumped into this continent on his way to the Far East. But on this continent there were over 600 Native American tribes. Each had their own traditional ways and they had their own language. And so it was that there had to be a means to communicate with one another. And so it was that there was a universal language that pretty much most all Native American people used, and that was the what's called from time to time the Indian Sign Language, but it is the motion of the hand, the way that people communicated. And down through the years, that was the means for the many different Native American tribes and groups and that were able to communicate. And the Dene, we pretty much have our own way of the way that the original greetings and that were done. And when you look at the hand, there are certain ways to use this hand to make signs. If you're pointing at someone, you point with the two fingers, and that's to identify the male and the female of an individual. And then if you are pointing out to some distant area, you would point with the four fingers. And then when you would point to yourself, you would point with the thumb. And so it is that anything that is sacred, when you point to it, you point with your thumb. So you would point to yourself with the thumb because you are a sacred being that is descendant of holy people. You would also point at a newborn baby with your thumb, or even a medicine bundle. And the other thing is the rainbow in the sky after a rainfall, is you point with your thumb. And so when we speak with the hand motion or the Indian Sign Language, one of the greetings is to say hello, and to say it in the hand motion, you would put your thumb to your heart, and then you would move your hand away and then open up your hand as you moved your hand away from you. And so that would be the greeting. From my heart, everything on the surface of Mother Earth is good. And it is also a way to say thank you. From my heart, thank you. And so it is that is this one hand motion. And but there are many. There are those that identify women. There are those that identify men or children. And even when I was growing up, I remember my father, sometimes he wouldn't even have to use the language. He would just point, and then he would, like he were in need of butchering a sheep or something, he would just point, and then he would go like this, and I would understand that to mean, select that one right there and butcher it. When you were going to butcher a sheep, you would not speak about butchering in front of the sheep. So it was best to make the sign language or the hand motion without saying butcher that one. So it was that was pretty much the universal sign. And when sometimes when my mother would call us in to eat food, she would make one shout, and then everybody would look at her, and then she would go, that would mean eat. And sometimes when they would be drinking and drink some water or something, this is what they would do, is the sign language. And so there was no word spoken, but it was all in the hand motion. And there are other ways than that only the Dene do. And that one of them is the idea of when you're pointing at someone, if you do it with the two fingers, many times that is a specific person. But if you want to just point in a direction, then you would point with your lip. And that would be like just pointing with your lip. And that's something that only Navajo people seem to do, is to point with the lip. Sometimes people might think you're pointing with your chin, but it's actually very, very quick motion, and that when you do that. So the languages that are spoken by many of the different tribes, and that it's very important to understand and encourage Native people and that to continue learning their language. And even our young people are losing the ability to speak the language. I know that my great-grandfather on my mother's side, he spoke the language of our people, the Nebazad, and then he spoke Spanish, and then he also spoke Hopi, as I've been told. And then on my father's side, my great-grandfather, he spoke Navajo, of course, and then he spoke Spanish as a second language, and then he spoke Zuni, and I think one other Puebloan tribe, and that was the Acoma people, because they lived in close proximity with one another, and many times there might be some intermarried situations and that with some of the other tribe, and so it was that out of courtesy they would speak the language of those other tribes and that. But I know that some of my relatives had spoken and were able to speak many different languages. And so today I encourage the young people, anyone, to learn another language. It's really good to be trilingual, being able to speak 3 different languages, but even being bilingual, and to do it well. And that's what we were told when we were growing up, is to understand our language. And I was always encouraged to learn to speak the English language. And back then, my grandparents and that, none of them spoke English, and so they would encourage me, and they would say, "Don't be like us." Is something that they would say, and that would mean, learn the language of the white people. Us, we have this small stubby ear, and that meant we don't speak the English language, and we encourage you to learn. And that was the things that I've been told.